Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 17th of June, 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We'll also be joined by video Skype link by David Scott from Northern Exposure. And also, we're delighted to have Alex Thompson from Eastern Approaches, who will be speaking to us live from, I think you're in Ghent. Well, before we move on to obviously news, much of which, of course, is dominated by the death of MP Joe Cox, comment on the weather. Not too good here in Plymouth, overcast showers, and that seems to be the reflection across the country. A grey day for UK in more than one way. Before we introduce our guests, we just thought we'd have a little look at the state of British politics in 2016. And we picked up on this Guardian image of the election or victory speech of Labour MP Rosena Allin-Khan. And what we wanted to highlight is this gentleman standing behind her, thuggish, dark glasses, almost mafia style. Is this really where British politics has sunk to in 2006? I find this really offensive, Mike. I don't know whether I'm alone in this.
Probably the Conservative Party candidate.
Probably the Conservative Party candidate could well be. So if that's one indication of the state of the country at the moment, we're also going to say, please do listen to this remarkable interview which David Scott did with Brian and Janice Doherty, which shows what happened to an innocent mum and dad when they dared to report a man who wanted to buy their son to be abused. And David, I'll bring you in here because, of course, you've pointed out that there's a fairly high-level meeting going on today. I believe it's today with Nicola Sturgeon and Irish counterparts.
Yes, this is right. This is Nicola Sturgeon who's hosting the British-Irish Council meeting today. So I was wondering what's going to be on the agenda here. It's the British-Irish Council. It's hosted by Nicola Sturgeon. She's fully aware of the Doherty case. Brian Doherty has written to her personally many times. Is she going to raise the welfare of this family? Is she going to raise the question of when they're going to get the children back with her Irish counterparts? One would like to think so, but I fear the answer will be no.
I think I'd share that fear, and we just say for people who are not familiar maybe with the Doherty case, what we are talking about is a complete failure of the state in Scotland to respond when parents go for help in countering the approaches of a paedophile. The political circles don't work, the police don't work, the courts don't work. In fact, the parents become victimised themselves. So very dark times for Scotland, which now appears to be a one-party state, one-party police state, and with no separation of justice, law.
Well, on a positive note, Brian, the number of armed officers in Police Scotland is going to increase by a third.
Thank you for that. Well, I'm pretty sure we're going to see the same happening in UK, and perhaps today's news will lead us through that.
We should just mention that, of course, is the first of a series of interviews that David has done.
Indeed. So that the Doherty interview that we've just shown there is number one. There will be a further 9 interviews in order to cover that story in the detail it requires. Mike.
Yes. Well, I wanted to highlight this front page, which, of course, was from the Daily Mail yesterday. And the headline is, as politicians squabble over border controls, yet another lorry load of migrants arrives in the UK declaring, we're from Europe, let us in. So that was the front page, yesterday's Daily Mail. And today, well, they've put a short clarification in. They're saying, in common with other newspapers, we published a reputable news agency story yesterday, which said that stowaways intercepted in East London had told police that they were from Europe. In fact, while they had travelled to the UK in an Italian vehicle from mainland Europe, the migrants told police they were from Iraq and Kuwait. So one gets the front page and the other gets a couple of paragraphs. But number of questions arising from this. Which was this reputable news agency? Was this a staged story with a deliberate correction the following day? just in order to wind people up over the EU referendum?
Well, one thing's for sure, Mike, of course, people will have read the front page. How many people would actually read that very small text block on the correction? So what we're highlighting here is, can we trust Britain's media? Well, as we move on to the subject of the death of Jo Cox MP, we think maybe not. So let's have a look at the Evening Standard. Thank you very much to the person who pointed this one out to us. And what's the title? Remain MP gunned down in the street. So we're just going to say no spin at all here, as a Remain MP is gunned down. And of course, we now get into the debate as to whether this was motivated by the EU referendum at all, in any way or not. We thought we'd start by breaking down some of the information to get as much as we can up on screen, so that we can get some comment from our guest today. So let's bring in the killer, Tommy, or alleged killer, Tommy Mayer. And here he is, his face, of course, appearing in many papers and BBC, etc. Jo Cox herself, tragic victim, and some very interesting reports. This is a Telegraph video where a witness said he saw Tommy Mayer take a shotgun. He specifically describes it as a shotgun out of the bag. He also says that the victim was lying sort of semi-propped up, almost as if she was on the beach with one arm propping herself up, but she was silent, and he knew something was wrong when he saw the blood. Now, that's a pretty interesting statement because, of course, if it was a shotgun to fire 3 shots, it would have to be a pump-action shotgun, or he reloaded. But as we'll see, other people are refuting the fact it was a shotgun. What is the truth? Well, the police were on the streets, and of course, we quickly see Britain's black police. So these are people dressed in black, many of them with no identification, no personal numbers. The reason we've included this is the thuggish police state grows. Well, here he is. Former Labour leader Neil Kinnock was crying in a TV interview. He was been so upset by this killing. I don't know whether he's cried for any of the British soldiers who've died overseas or families who've lost relatives in the NHS, but he was shedding tears. We had flag at half-mast over Buckingham Palace. This was very interesting. We had Polly Toynbee from The Guardian, hate whipped up against the political class. I think you might comment on that a little bit later, Mike. And question time after the 10 o'clock news last night was effectively cancelled. We've got this report here by the BBC, EU referendum suspended, referendum interviews cancelled, monetary fund report has been delayed, David Cameron cancels a rally in Gibraltar, it goes on. And this is one of the hot topics that there was a supposed link to Britain First. That's now being said, we're now being told that's unsubstantiated. And this one was interesting, little video clip of Angela Merkel saying, well, I don't want to link British events with Orlando or any other shootings, but I think it's important that we have political unity.
But in fact, by saying that, she does exactly that, doesn't she? She
does link this with a variety of other killings.
Yes.
So on the note of political unity, I think we'll bring in Alex. You have, I'll just bring this on screen because I know you're just on a phone at the moment, but you produced an article from Les Echos, which is talking about the Brexit campaign being suspended. What's the view from the continent?
Well, Brian, a couple of hours ago, I was discussing the case with a professor here at the University of Ghent, and he told me straight-faced, and he was getting this from Dutch and French news, of course, in his own country, that people like that Farage whip hatred, and that hatred ends up killing people like your MP yesterday. That's what the political class are saying. That is also what Frau Merkel is saying when she says we need political unity. I hadn't heard that in the German media, but she will have used the German phrase politische Einheit, and that does not mean rallying around a political event. It means unity among the politicians, unity of the political class or the establishment is what politisch means in German. So that's what she's calling for. And as you'll have shown on screen, Les Echos put me on a trail which is very little reported in the British domestic media, which is that the Southern Poverty Law Center, the SPLC, which is alongside the American Civil Liberties Union, is one of these dinosaur hard left campaign groups in the US that claims to be improving the lot of the black people in America. The SPLC, while it was still yesterday, of course they had more hours in the US with the time difference, dug out the fact that this alleged killer, we often find ourselves not using the word alleged anymore, the alleged killer had paid hundreds of dollars to buy far-right manuals from the National Alliance, which was actually wound up in 2013. A couple of people might remember that its late founder wrote a series of books in the 70s called the Turner Diaries, envisaging an all-white or a race war future in America. So, you know, it's controlled opposition, US government-funded neo-Nazi stuff, which allegedly inspired Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber. So you can see where the trail is going there.
Well, thank you for that, Alex. I'm very pleased to say we have done some homework into that, so we'll be able to bring some of that information on screen in just a second. You'd also raised this one about the background of Thomas Mayer, and of course he had mental health problems.
Yes, it's just interesting that the Continentals appear to know more about the health problems than the British news do, is the only thing I wanted to say there. I did notice that the Telegraph had two stories on the alleged killer. One seems to have been taken down, or at least had its URL changed, but the version indexed by Google I couldn't find again this morning. But the other is the rolling all we know about the story, which seems to be a Telegraph special these days for everything they do. And in that one, which is still up, the brother is quoted in terms as saying, in quotation marks, "My brother was not all that political. I don't know which party he voted for. He never talked about Europe or anything like that. But he does say that the man was psychologically unstable." Before I forget to say it, also my own MP in Cheltenham, when I first came to GCHQ in the early 2000s, was a man who sadly was attacked by, again, a mentally deranged constituent with a samurai sword, and it severely injured him, Nigel Jones. He's a baron these days, and it killed his assistant, and he was never the same man again after that attack. But what we didn't get after that was this call that we're now finding for MPs' surgeries to be behind toughened glass, or US congressman-style armed guards when you meet your representative. And I should also say, before I forget, that the Continentals haven't had geographical constituencies for 100 years. They abolished them all after the First World War while no one was noticing. So they don't have the concept of going to see your MP on the continent, and it's rather unfortunate for European unity that we do have it. Perhaps that's what's one of the things being pushed here.
Well, that language was used after the Stephen Timms attack, of course. But what was interesting last night, Alex, was that some of the rhetoric around this was suggesting that there would have to be new controls put in place to make sure that anybody visiting an MP was vetted first, and this was the language that was being used. So I thought vetted was an interesting word in this case.
It implies we're animals or livestock, doesn't it? I was vetted. I got developed vetting to work at GCHQ. That implies fundamental, thorough background checks on your political opinions and your bank balance and everything. Your sexual orientation. That's what I understand by vetting. You know, and it seems that we have a death of 1,000 cuts in the British public to persuade them not to go and see their MPs anymore. For a start, anyone imported from Eastern Europe or another continent, or even anywhere on the continent of Europe, doesn't have the concept, and so would never think of going to see their MP. Anyone under a certain age who's not been told in school by civics or whatever, by the local community about their MPs, won't think of seeing them. And a lot of people think that the cross they put in their box is for a national party, which is the system in most countries with proportional representation, with no local geographical representation. So we're being nudged towards that for sure, and we're being urged conveniently to forget that we have people to hold to account called members of parliament.
Alex, thank you for that. Before we move on into the research that we've all done on this killing, perhaps we should just bring David in to comment on what's the feeling north of the border.
Well, it's a little early to tell. Nicola Sturgeon, as is her wont, tweeted out how heartbroken she was about this person, although she had never met her. We're seeing north of the border the geographical link with the MSPs is somewhat less clear north of the border than it is with the Westminster Parliament. My experience in going to see our political overlords has been it's very difficult in Scotland. There seems to be a long waiting list or very few surgeries, and they want to know what you want to say to them, what you want to discuss before you're given an audience. So we're seeing that the link, and it's a very healthy link where you can go along to surgery and you can express a view, and your political representative won't know what you're going to say before you say it. That's very open. That allows views which are not in the mainstream and are not the accepted wisdom to be expressed to our political leaders. We're seeing it eroded in Scotland. It would be a great shame to see that destroyed in England.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, let's just move on through the subject of the gunman and his links. And we'll start with The Guardian, which is where we started to find some interesting information. So we got the death of Joe Cox. Police investigate motive of the killing of the Labour MP. Latest news. Then if you had a look, they had various tweets posted. And this is the one we picked up on. Oh, sorry, I've just gone one too far on that. Bear with me. We'll just come through there again. Should highlight here. Yeah, so it's this is the one that suddenly mentions the Southern Poverty Law Centre, SPLC, which published receipts that appeared to show that Thomas Mayer bought, amongst other books, a manual on how to make a homemade pistol from the National Alliance. So we were astonished that while the police are still apparently investigating this, well, they can sit down with a cup of tea, because the international journalism has already tracked down what sort of man this was. They've got the evidence. So if I bring that up on screen, we'll just obviously bring in Joe Cox again. And we had the report of a shotgun. You'll see the significance of this. Now we can bring in this Southern Law Centre. And of course, what we find fairly quickly is it's funded by George Soros Open Society. It's got about $250 million in assets. Most of the money is spent on salaries. But what this organisation claims it's there is fighting hate speech, hate organisations. So very interested to find George Soros in there. And then this organisation says, yes, we got hold of the documentation that proved that this man had taken information on how to build a homemade...
Spectacularly quickly.
Well, it must have literally...
Dropped out the sky.
He bought some of this stuff back in 1999, apparently, but there it was on a plate for this Southern Poverty Law Centre, and the next minute it's injected back into world media. So they said, well, he bought the plans for a crude homemade gun. How do you fire 3 shots from a crude homemade gun? You have to reload, or
why would you bother building a crude homemade gun when you can go into your local pub and buy one for a couple of £100?
Good question. But not only did they have the gun, they had receipts for sort of making explosives and a variety of things. You can see these yourself online. I assure you that as far as the subject matter is concerned, these are real. And then, of course, this linked back to the extremist National Vanguard organisation. And we'll just pop in here that the Southern Law Centre on its website carries a hate map of the USA, where apparently it has listed all of the very nasty hate groups that have sprung up in the USA. Now, all of this seems good until we come to this report, which is from Breitbart, and it says very clearly that the FBI has dumped the Southern Poverty Law Centre as a hate crimes resource. Now, why did it do it? It did it because it said that where the FBI has found that hate crimes and hate groups have been declining significantly in the last 10 years, the Southern Poverty Law Centre claims hate groups have increased by a massive 67%. So very interesting to see that the source of data saying, well, this man is a sort of known hate extremist seems to be challenged by the FBI. Perhaps we could say, Alex, would you like to comment on that one?
I will, thank you. Just before I have to slip off, and I'll say that if you've been following politics for a long time, you will see that the SPLC, together with the ACLU, has been panned for years and years, even by Democrat voters and the core Democrat groups such as African Americans and Jewish Americans, precisely because it's filled with these interns who obviously are rent-seeking. They want more funding from Mr. Soros and his ilk, and they get that by seeing Nazis behind every tree and in every southern town, of course. So the SPLC went far beyond its brief of apparently digging up receipts by providing this quote, which has ricocheted around the whole of Europe in the news this morning, that he was the alleged killer was a dedicated member of the Heritage Alliance, the National Alliance. Well, how can you say that on the basis of a few receipts when the body is still warm? Literally, it's obscene. One more thing I'll say before I have to go is that I was upbraided in no uncertain terms on Facebook this morning for daring to put a Brexit image on Facebook, and I was told, don't you know that campaigning has been suspended for the day? And that's interesting because the very same person who was telling me that was posting just before and just after he upbraided me, respectively, a Spectator and a Guardian piece, the one by Polly Toynbee, wringing their hands and saying, most people who want Britain out of the EU are fine, upstanding citizens, but a few of them are horrible people, and this impersonal force of hate is killing people now. Well, I would just retort to that by saying most people who wish Britain to remain in the EU are decent people just thinking about themselves and their future, but behind them are a few genocidal population replacement maniacs. Can I get away with saying that? I haven't got a column in The Spectator, but it's the equivalent, and apparently it's still within the rules for respecting Joe Cox today.
Okay, Alex, thank you very much for that. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to have you back soon.
But the hate issue is certainly being pushed in every possible outlet at the moment, Brian. So we've got Euractiv, big European Union, pro-European Union blog site, that the alleged killer was a neo-Nazi supporter.
Was.
Yes.
This is all factual stuff, allegedly.
Yes. And this is, sorry, I can't quite, that's the Times of Israel, is that? I think it is. Alleged killer of MP, a British MP, was neo-Nazi supporter. Yeah. So the sort of extreme right wing aspect of this is being pushed very hard. There seems to be an attempt to sort of link that to the Brexit campaign, and this has got to be pretty dangerous.
It's very dangerous, but it's orchestrated. That was the Times of Israel, just to confirm that. So we have this massive orchestrated onslaught that the killer is a crazed right-wing gunman. It's all pushed out as if it is fact, but as we're starting to see very quickly, there's a whole lot of questions to be asked. But what's this going to produce? That ring of steel around MPs, which some of our chat box people are talking about.
Well, that's exactly what it seems to be. So this is the Telegraph saying that Joe Cox had been suffering from a 3-month harassment campaign, that her security was about to be increased, and so she was. It isn't really clear exactly where this harassment campaign was coming from, of course.
But it was not. They are saying it was not from Thomas Mayer. The police have actually made a statement, Mike, saying
that's right. I would imagine social media was involved in this, and as we've already highlighted, many people suggesting that MPs need further protection. And of course, this Conservative Home blog post, quite spectacular language being used in this. An MP is murdered, shocking, yes, but not at all surprising. The portents were there. This was coming, and this is by Paul Goodman, who's an ex-MP. He's currently a journalist. And he says, when I served as MP for Wickham, the association's office contained a bookcase. Among the volumes stacked in it were old copies of that familiar work, The Times Guide to the House of Commons. I would occasionally thumb through the immediate post-war editions, which detailed the military service of that generation's parliamentarians. MPs have never been popular. Here lies the paradox. He goes on to say, no generation of parliamentarians has ever worked harder in their seats than this one, but none has grappled with higher expectations. Amidst a culture with attention deficit disorder, life has become more dangerous for MPs and their staff. Andrew Pennington, an aide to former Liberal Democrat MP, was killed. That was the one that Alex was referring to earlier. 52 MPs have reportedly had their property interfered with or damaged, including the slashing of car tires, paint stripper poured over their vehicles, and bricks thrown through the windows. Some are stalked, alarm systems are being installed, hotlines to the police being put in. This is the background noise of our politics, the ambient sound which the mayors of our age are turned into. The terrible murder of Joe Cox must thus be shocking, and it is deeply, but it's not at all surprising. The portents have been there for long. And so he goes on, and he ends up by saying, today we should ask some big questions about the way in which we treat MPs. There does seem to be a balance between criticising and abusing them, thus deterring good people from politics. We have gated communities. We will end up with gated communities, insulated from constituents for their own protection. The loveless men and homeless boys out there are out there and angry, writes Carol Ann Duffy. Nightly, people end their lives in the shortcut, walk in the light, steadily hurries towards me, safely, safely, safely home, and so on. So he's quoting somebody there. Joe Cox is not coming home. Her murder is a bleak moment in Britain, and there are many more loveless men out there. So they're absolutely pushing this as hard, that MPs are under threat.
And nothing to say what's going wrong with MPs. If this is this feeling, what are the MPs doing wrong? And of course, we are quickly seeing what's going wrong is that the MPs are running an agenda completely detached from the people who elected them.
David, this is a key point. And on the Radio 4 News last night, one of the people commenting on this said, this was a lady just doing her job. It's surely part of the problem here is that the perception amongst the public is that MPs aren't doing their job.
Yes, or that the job is not to serve the public. The job is increasingly being viewed by the public as ruling over us against our will, destroying our laws, and undermining our society. The comment you made there, Mike, about the military service. One thing the military service had, which was so common at one point amongst the people in the House of Parliament did, is it gave people a different perspective because it had taken them out of the perhaps narrow confines that they had come from. Harold Macmillan, for example, when he was involved in dealing with a miners' strike, Harold Macmillan had served in a regiment in the First World War from a mining area. He'd fought and risked his life with these men and had an extremely high regard for the miners, and that changed how he viewed that political dispute. And I think to look at wartime as something that divided the country is wrong. It rather did the reverse. The idea that we're now concentrating on the harassment of the political class. We need to be concentrating on harassment of people, of human beings, be they political class or be they not, be the people at the docketties who are harassed by the political class and by the state. What we need is a concentration on the rule of law. First and foremost, thou shalt not kill. But that has to go to all of our people equally and not with special provision for a political elite.
And one of the other points that was sort of being pushed was that we shouldn't be personalizing politics. The politics is becoming too personal, and this seems to be another thread that's arising following Joe Cox's death. What's your take on that?
Well, what's the alternative? It just becomes a party political game. I mean, if it's not personal, what is it? We're meant to be electing people who have the integrity and gumption to actually represent us in Parliament. So it's got to be personal, has it not?
Well, that's what I think, and it concerns me that if it isn't personal, if it isn't about the actions of individuals who are our MPs, it becomes about the actions of the Tory party or the Labour Party, which is pretty much the same as the actions of Disney or of, I don't mean Disney in particular, but of a corporation, because they're hiding behind a name at that point.
Yes, the ultimate and impersonal political rule is the EU. I have no relationship or understanding of the nature of the people ruling us from Europe at all, and that's not exactly good for the relationship between the people and the rulers, for democracy, for getting proper representation, for having your case heard, any of these things. The ability to actually go to a human being and interact with them as a human being and say, here's a problem, here is an injustice, you're in a position of authority, you need to do something, is vital.
Yes. Now, yeah, you brought this to our attention, this Haaretz article here, Joe Cox's murder. In Western democracies too, politicians die for their beliefs. And the subheading is, the campaign over the Brexit referendum has been a divisive period for Britain, but who would have expected it to lead to a political assassination? That's pretty strong words.
It is, and they go on here. This is Haaretz, the normally very good Israeli newspaper. It goes on, Cox, a new Labour MP, was an energetic supporter of Britain remaining in the EU, but beyond that she campaigned for allowing refugees into the country, a position that many in her own party colleagues were wary of taking openly. This weekend, a number of prominent Labour politicians have said that the party would have to get tougher on immigration if it was to hope of recovering the working class voters, abandoning Labour in droves. And they also say political assassination is exceedingly rare in Britain. In previous decades, MPs were assassinated in terrorist attacks by Irish Republicans who saw the United Kingdom as an occupying enemy, but no one expected someone to get killed as a result of internal politics. Now, what I'm seeing and what I would expect is we'll see someone being killed as a result of an individual with serious mental health problems. That's not political assassination. So this is within 24 hours of the event, we're seeing foreign newspapers coming with this narrative that we're seeing a political assassination. I suspect it's nothing like that. I mean, we'll need to get all the facts and see what we're dealing with here, but it wouldn't appear to be that at all. There is no extreme right wing of any size in Britain. And really never has been. It's always been a very marginal stream of thought in Britain. I don't think we're looking at this at all. I think this is a gross misrepresentation of the nature of what has happened.
This is LBC this morning, just to try to put this to bed once and for all, because this is a photograph of the shop window from the original witness that was quoted, and he has put a sign in there saying, "Please note, I did not tackle the gunman, and no one shouted Britain first at any time." This is the gentleman that was quoted by the newspapers as having allegedly claimed that Britain first was shouted, and he, LBC is reporting, was slightly concerned for his own safety as a result, so he felt the need to put this notice in the shop window. It appears that Angela Eagle was the source of this original claim, actually via Twitter. So I think there are a few questions to be asked there and to be answered.
The BBC had someone on video saying Britain first was shouted.
So where did that come from? But this particular gentleman absolutely making it clear, at least according to LBC, that was not the case.
Yeah, it would be extremely concerning if we're seeing this tragedy hijacked for a narrow political gain in terms of the politics surrounding the EU referendum. That would be completely unacceptable, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Now, we're not, of course, campaigning, so we can talk about the EU referendum, and particularly with regard to Scotland. So here is The Spectator. The Scottish Brexit poll shows a big drop in support for Remain.
Yes, it's dropped by some 13%. Now, it was sky high, and it's still sitting over 50%, and it's still a substantial lead over over the exit, the pro-leave vote in Scotland, according to the polls. But it is dropping like a stone. And this reflects changes we've started to see in the country as a whole, where you're seeing polls coming and showing 10, or even in one poll I saw 19% advantage for leave. And clearly, until everything was stopped by the tragic events in the last 2 days, the momentum was very much with the leave campaign, and that seemed to be the way it was going.
And is this a rejection of Project Fear? Is this what is driving this?
Yes, well, Project Fear has a particular resonance in Scotland, because Project Fear was what, with some justification, the pro-independence nationalists called the Remain in the UK campaign, which was called Better Together, which was a very strange and negative and unoptimistic and humorless campaign that was run to support the union, and it was contrasted against the nationalist campaign, which was optimistic to the point of irrationality sometimes, but it was certainly optimistic. And they were the pro-nationalist vote was characterising the differences as hope versus fear, and the Remain in the UK campaign was christened Operation Fear. So clearly the parallels are drawing here now. The Remain in the EU campaign is operating on exactly the same basis. I mean, in fact, it's much worse, because nobody said if Scotland left the UK we would have World War III. Nobody suggested that would happen, but that's actually been put forward by elements within the Remain campaign. So we've certainly got Project Fear, and it does seem to be turning the voters off. It's not working. It's not working in Scotland. It's certainly not working in England, and people seem to be seeing through the fear-mongering.
But referendum fever perhaps getting started here, because we got Nippy declaring that there will be plans for a post-Brexit independence referendum, or at least they're being considered. But also Sinn Féin in Ireland saying that Brexit would lead to a referendum on Irish unification. So everybody seems to be jumping on the bandwagon.
Well, bandwagon is right. I mean, none of these people have got any support for the position, right? The idea that the people of Scotland are going to turn around and come up with a different answer because we're not in the EU is mostly fictional. It's the problem is an entirely political one for the SNP, because they've built the case for Scottish independence on the basis of being not independent from the EU. That wasn't the traditional SNP position many years ago. They wanted independence to mean just that, but the modern SNP have built that for years, and if we are no longer in the EU, their entire policy, including economic policy, is in tatters. And the idea that you can solve the Irish problem with a referendum, well, I think
there's nothing to be said there, is there? Well, tell us about reimagining Europe then.
Well, I've got a few examples here of things that are coming out of the Church of Scotland, or the churches in Scotland, because we're getting quite different stories coming forward. One of the prominent people in the Church of Scotland, which is the biggest Protestant denomination. There's no such thing as an official church or an established church in Scotland, but it's the nearest thing we have. What they were saying was, well, in fact, if you're going to leave the EU, really this is a moral issue, and you're letting yourself down and you're letting humanity down. And they were very strongly suggesting that any sort of vote to leave would be surrendering very important Christian principles, and they were putting almost that a vote to leave is sinful. They didn't quite go that far, but they actually got quite close. One or two of the other, have you got any of the other quotes I've sent you through? Smaller churches in Scotland are, yes, this is the chap who said that this is a gentleman within the Church of Scotland. He said that the EU has brought peace, and we've got bureaucracy, not bombs. So, be grateful for what you've got. Could be worse. And if we vote to leave, then that's a moral issue, a moral failing, essentially. If we vote to leave.
And then there's the Free Church of Scotland.
The Free Church of Scotland continuing, which is the more hard line of the Free Churches of Scotland. So these people don't tend to do an awful lot of compromising. But I quite like their summary. It said the General Assembly Standing Committee for the consideration of the forthcoming referendum on the UK's membership of the European Union. They instruct the publication committee to place the text on the church website and give it appropriate publicity. The text, incidentally, is actually quite good. It's quite a full examination of the history of the EU and what it all means. Far better than you get in the mainstream media. They go on, they pray that the Lord, who is sovereign over all things, would be pleased to deliver the UK from the membership of this ungodly union and to restore to us godly laws. So that's the old school Scottish Church speaking there. But I like very much the idea that what we need to have is restored godly laws. Now, what we should remember, of course, today, first and foremost, thou shalt not kill. We need to be, these are laws of love, and we need to be responding accordingly. But we certainly need to have our laws restored to us.
David, thank you for those words, which I totally agree with. I couldn't help smile at seeing Archbishop Welby there on the picture, because the man who's been photographed hobnobbing with the international bankers, etc., is also the man who doesn't want to talk about the subject of Satanism. And of course, at the moment, he's been challenged by a number of people, including Robert Greene, as to what he's going to do to help protect children from satanic ritual abuse. And his answer to date has been a stunning silence. So I find it ironic that a church, and I'm going to say the church led by Mr. Welby, which can't recognise evil, should be helping to promote the European Union. It's an interesting little conundrum.
Yes, but I understand his predecessor in that post is now advocating we should leave the EU. So even in the Church of England, there seems to be confusion.
That's true, but not at the moment with Mr. Welby, who's pushing the European Union extremely hard.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to a couple of financial stories then. David, I wanted to get your comments on this, that the Zero Hedge here highlighting the fact that the bets by hedge funds and other speculators on negative interest rates in the United States are reaching record highs. And it says here, as the deflationary supernova sweeps across the world, dragging bond yields to zero and beyond, even the almighty omniscient Federal Reserve has been forced to capitulate as cheapness of treasury bonds lures the world's yield hunters, dragging it ever closer to the negative rate realities of Switzerland, Japan, and Germany. Just give us your thoughts on this.
Yes, America now is sky-high interest rates at 0.5%. That's now viewed as being really very conservative. If you look at the balance sheets across the world, Switzerland, and especially Japan, most of this is coming from Japan, there is a sea of negative interest rates coming our way. And of course, none of it makes any sense. We're price fixing the cost of money at a negative amount. So what this means is that the well-connected, the banks, what's termed the 1%, it was more accurately the 1% of the 1%, have access to unlimited free money. In fact, subsidised money. And this is an enormous wealth transfer from the ordinary man in the street to a very small elite. We're seeing that reflected in where all the gains are as the economy grows, which it's more or less doing a little. The gains are no longer shared with everyone in the society. The gains are concentrated at the top. It's theft. It's theft on a grand scale, and it won't even work on the level it's meant to operate. The idea here is that if you are no longer getting interest at the bank, you will stop saving and spend money and boost the economy. We're sitting in an economy mired in debt, but that's the plan. It's incredible stupidity that is the plan. But even on its own terms, it won't work, because if you are trying to pay down debt, and you are worried about your future, and you are worried about how you and your children are going to survive, and you see that you're no longer getting 5 or 10% interest, but you're getting 0, you'll save more, not less, because you have to make up for that missing amount.
Absolutely. So, but perhaps you won't save it with a bank. That's another thing. Now, right, just ending this.
I would on that subject, Mike. Actually, one of the criticisms of gold and silver, but principally gold as a saving method, is it's got no yield. It's not meant to have a yield. It's money. You don't have a yield unless you've got a risk. It's just money. It just sits there, just the same way as a £10 note doesn't have yield. But in negative interest rate world, no yield is not a problem. No yield is in fact yield.
Yeah, indeed. Just the final financial story of today. Then this is HSBC have decided that they are going to pay out a record $1.6 billion. And this is to settle a legal class action suit surrounding subprime mortgages. So they are paying a pre-tax fine of $585 million, and that's on top of the $1.575 billion compensation to shareholders. And this is to end a lawsuit filed some time ago. So HSBC continuing to just give away money because of past crimes. Nobody going to prison yet. I suppose when they're printing it in this zero interest rate or negative interest rate world, it's no problem to them, David.
Well, this is it. And there are no one goes to prison. That's the key point. There can be massive fraud. There can be fraud on a huge international scale. No one goes to prison. Yeah. Except perhaps the occasional whistleblower. They might go to prison.
Thank you, David. Well, we'll just end with the other people that go to prison are parents who are standing up for their children. And if you want to really understand the mindset amongst our political elite, have a listen to this Doherty interview, and there will be another 9 in the series. It is just outstanding, the information that comes out of this family. And of course, what it's really telling us is that we have a criminal political elite in power. And what the programme has covered today, we can see that some of those people are now getting very fearful, and they are pulling up the drawbridge. They're getting those security fences in. I think we will be seeing more armed police on the streets in UK. We're going to see anybody daring to challenge the government is going to be labelled an extremist, and the questions asked afterwards. Is all of this the result of an accident? Is it just the way the people are? Well, of course it's not. This vicious situation in UK where people are turning on each other has been created, and it is very, very easy to see whose hand has been behind it. Follow the money trail. We've talked about the murder of Joe Cox, and of course that has led us back to George Soros. Look at the trail of the money that's created the colour revolutions and violence and warfare in so many countries around the Middle East. It's becoming increasingly easy to see who's creating this malevolent situation. What can we do? It's exposure. So don't be fearful, stand up, speak out, and make sure you tell as many people as possible. That's it for today. Thank you very much for joining us. David, thank you. We will be back on Monday. Have a good weekend, but be busy. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.